My name is Vivian Kulaga, and I'm a trauma specialist. I specialize in EMDR therapy, treating PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, as well as chronic pain and illness conditions such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivities, depression, and anxiety. I have a PhD in toxicology and pharmacology, as well as training in EMDR therapy and therapies of meditation, mindfulness in chronic pain and depression, as well as hypnotherapy and yoga. I'm not just an EMDR therapist, I'm also a trauma survivor. So I suffered early childhood trauma, and I also suffered adulthood trauma that was quite significant. My story is on my website, of course, but that story led me to EMDR therapy. So EMDR therapy stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing Therapy. EMDR therapy was first developed by Francine Shapiro in the late 1980s. However, what's more interesting than just the history of EMDR is actually that all the research that's been done about its efficacy. So there's been a lot of scientific studies and a lot of clinical evidence to show how effective it is as a psychotherapeutic intervention for trauma, specifically post-traumatic stress disorder, but also for trauma associated with many other symptoms and conditions like anxiety, depression, as well as physical manifestations of trauma in the form of chronic fatigue or chronic pain and illness. Firstly, EMDR is extremely effective. Not to say that other therapies aren't effective, but I've had a lot of clients that have come from other therapies that have done years of therapy that haven't had the kind of lasting changes that they want. And EMDR therapy is just like a lightning bolt. Like, it just provides a solution that really works. And I think, it's for a bunch of different reasons. Partly because it works through unconscious processes, through rewiring the neural network in the brain. When an individual experiences trauma and they start to develop either negative beliefs about themselves, like I'm not good enough, or I deserved that, or, I'm worthless, or beliefs about the world like I'm not safe and it's dangerous, those can be really hard to treat through talk therapy, for example, just talking about it. Now, talk therapy can be very helpful in the sense that you could come to a lot of understanding about what's happened. You could feel some sense of comfort and some understanding by another person. However, in my experience and the experience of a lot of clients that have come to me, what happens is that, oftentimes they report that in the end, nothing has changed. Okay, so now they know why they have the problem, they understand what the problem's about, but the problem itself hasn't really changed. Whereas with EMDR, it actually changes the problem. And that's because we're not just changing a problem that works through neural circuitry that acts on, automatically through these subconscious processes in the brain. We're not trying to change that on a cognitive level by talking about it, but we're actually changing it through a series of eye movements that, facilitate certain processes in the brain to happen to actually change those neural pathways. And what that means is that the unconscious thought patterns, emotional reactions, behaviors, those automatic triggers like, flashbacks, nightmares, emotional reactions, all of that, they just change. And it's usually instantaneously. Obviously, you work in a stepwise process, session to session, but after a given session, the things that change, they just change right away. And it's not something that you have to keep working on or have to do homework. It's something that changes instantly in the session. And so it's very powerful. Any client that experiences EMDR experiences those powerful changes for themselves. You can absolutely work with clients using EMDR through distance, like either by Skype or other video conferencing, as long as you have a good connection and privacy, and you have a safe place to do it. The procedure is exactly the same as in office, and I've worked in office with clients, and I've also worked by Skype, and I've seen the exact same results and the exact same type of processing and the exact same type of progress. So you absolutely can. I have had clients who have had reservation about working online, about working by Skype, thinking that, it wouldn't be the same, that you wouldn't feel quite that connection. And then after working, they report the same thing that I noticed, is that sometimes working online is actually more intimate, because you actually feel almost closer to the person because they're really in your face, and they're able to experience the same gains and changes that you would get in an in-person session. So I actually am writing an article on what a potential client should look for in an EMDR therapist. And the first thing is really simple. It's, do you like the person? Do you connect with the person when you talk to the person? And that's because there's a lot of scientific evidence to show that the rapport that you can build or feel with the client or with your therapist is the number one predictor of success, regardless of the therapy. A lot of clients sometimes go to a professional and stay with the professional, even though it doesn't feel quite right, because they feel, oh, this person is a professional and they know what they're doing. But if it doesn't feel right in your heart, then I would say look for someone else. The next thing is that an EMDR therapist should have undertaken an EMDRIA accredited training. And other than that, I would say if they participate in ongoing supervision or consultation or peer supervision. So what that is that there's a consensus in the field of therapy that if you're working with clients, that the responsible thing to do is to continue to talk to other professionals in the field about, your work, some difficult cases, places where you might get stuck, and you share information about new resources, new research that's coming out. You stay current in the field. Staying current in the field is a requirement in some cases, but participating in contracting supervision or consultation or engaging in peer supervision isn't always required of therapists. And some therapists don't do it because of the financial or constraints or the time constraints. However, then they're working in a vacuum. They're not getting the kind of feedback and the kind of support that is really, really important in this kind of work. Trauma work is very complex. The human mind is extremely complicated, and each individual is very unique. So it's not so important whether or not your therapist has specifically dealt with your problem, because your problem is actually very unique. It's more important, does your therapist have the proper support in place to deal with your complex problems, right? The proper training and the proper support, and that's an ongoing support. The last thing that's important is ask your therapist if they've done their own therapy. Because if you talk the talk, you should walk the walk. I like to think of the analogy, if you were planning to sail a sailboat across the world, a very difficult endeavor, and you wanted to do it solo, you could go and hire a sail instructor, you could go to a sailing school and talk to a lot of people, and you could learn a lot of very valuable information. However, if you talk to a sailor who actually did the trip that you wanted to do, who actually sailed across the world, who had that firsthand experience and all that knowledge, and they were to teach you, then you could imagine what kind of insight that individual would have, what kind of capacity for empathy, for understanding you that individual would have, and how that individual could help you. I really believe in a therapist, walking the walk and doing their own work before and when dealing with clients. I would never give a client advice in regards to medication, whether to take medication or not to take medication. That's between them and their doctor. It depends on the condition. Sometimes it acts like a Band-Aid. It can help a bit. Sometimes it doesn't help. Sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes it's necessary. The problem or the issues that individuals have, you have to solve the root causes. And medication doesn't usually address the root causes. But of course, that's a very general answer, and there's exceptions to it. has transformed the lives of many of my clients, including my own. It's just, you take a person who perhaps wasn't connected with themselves, didn't believe in themselves, didn't know what they wanted, was afraid to pursue what they wanted, or was afraid to speak up for themselves or advocate for themselves, to feel their dreams, to know their dreams, to be able to realize their dreams in their life. And once you work through their trauma and, allow them to heal, then it's like they know who they are. They feel connected to themselves. They feel connected to their purpose. They have the strength to advocate for themselves and the conviction that they're worth it, and they can believe in themselves and believe in what they do. So it gives them a tremendous amount of freedom, tremendous sense of relief, peace. It improves all the relationships in their lives. They usually end up following a better career path, or their career path in a more productive way, and they tend to disengage from unhealthy relationships. It's just a complete transformation of their life in a very positive way. And I've seen it a lot. EMDR is the perfect therapy for trauma, PTSD, and complex PTSD. Well, simply because it works so well. There's a lot of research that goes into why it works and how it works. But what's important is the end result. You have people that are plagued by things that have happened to them. They're tortured. They're tortured by their nightmares or their flashbacks. They're tortured by a constant state of anxiety. They're tortured by feelings of worthlessness, of feeling powerless. And when you do EMDR therapy, it's the only thing that I've ever encountered that can just break that and shift that and change that. It can help them feel safe. It can help them feel secure. It can change their negative beliefs to positive beliefs like, I deserve love, I'm lovable, I'm safe, I'm going to be okay, my future's going to be okay. So that's what it can do with trauma, PTSD, and complex PTSD. So a typical session depends on what stage of therapy you're in and what problem or issue you're addressing. So after history taking, if you're dealing with simple PTSD and EMDR is going according to a regular protocol, then you would catch up with the client, see how they're doing, and then you would begin either a new protocol or you would start working on their old protocol, which is focusing on a particular traumatic memory. And then you would start doing the bilateral stimulation, which can be done either by a series of eye movements, tones in the ears, or tapping, or using pulsars in the hands. That is what we call the processing phase of EMDR, to reprocess the traumatic memories. And then, of course, you always close the session using some containment exercises, going to a safe, calm place, and making sure that the client feels stable and happy and good at the end of a session that can be very difficult, but that the client feels good at the end of the session. So that's what a typical session would look like. Not every EMDR therapist has training in complex trauma, and not every client is aware that they have complex trauma. So what this means that if you go into EMDR and both client and therapist, particularly therapist, are unaware of this and they don't know how to handle it, they apply the regular EMDR standard protocol, what can happen is the person just, it becomes very difficult to face the traumatic memory, and it can be a very painful process, and it might not necessarily be as fruitful of a process. That doesn't mean that EMDR is ineffective or doesn't work. It means it's not being applied properly, because there are separate protocols that you need to do for complex trauma, and the individual has to be ready to go into the proper places, the origins. And the individual doesn't necessarily know that. They don't necessarily know when they're ready, but a properly trained professional can assess that together with the client in order to bring them into that place that needs to be processed at the right time and in the right way. So sometimes you do it in a titrated way where you process things that are more peripheral, that are not as disturbing. Adaptive information is gained into the neural network, and the individual is more stable and is more resourced and is able to go into deeper things in a comfortable way. So the process should never be rushed, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't go into a very painful memory with EMDR and be successful. You absolutely can. But when you are dealing with a person with complex trauma, you have to be very careful about how you do it. Is EMDR for everybody, or can it be used for every problem? I think that EMDR therapy can be helpful for most problems and in most individuals, but the therapist has to be properly trained into knowing how to titrate therapy accordingly, and how to deal with individuals that need special treatment because their problems are very complex. But I believe that if they're handled the right way, that the therapy is always beneficial if it's done properly. I get asked that question a lot. How long will my therapy take? And I wish I could tell, but the answer is that it's very hard to tell. Every person processes individually, and also what might appear to be one simple trauma might end up being a much more complex trauma when you open it. There might have been stuff from one's childhood that starts to come up, and then what could have been 2 or 3 sessions could end up being 8 or 9 months, for example. It is possible to process a one-off terrible event in 3 to 6 sessions. Most people with trauma that come to therapy don't have just a one-off event. They have suffered a lot of trauma. And I mean, I in particular, my clients have suffered a lot of early childhood abuse and trauma. And so that is something that often takes more sessions. But we're talking usually months as opposed to years, which is a significant improvement over, former forms of therapy or some other forms of longer term therapy. Yes, I've worked with many clients that were unaware of the trauma that they've sustained. Meaning, not that they didn't remember it, but they didn't recognize it as trauma, and they didn't understand or recognize the impact that it's had on their life, on their issues, and the symptoms that they're currently experiencing. What I can say is that I've seen many clients that have healed from severe emotional, physical, and sometimes sexual abuse from early childhood and some from adulthood. It's so hard when a child is exposed to a narcissistic or sociopathic individual, or an individual with other forms of mental illness or issues, because of course the child can't understand. And so they internalize a lot of negative beliefs about themselves. And that's really where the problem lies, because of those negative beliefs that they internalize about themselves, that leads to programming in their neural network that leads to automatic habit patterns in the way that they think, in the way that they behave and act, in the way that they feel. So it makes their lives very problematic and difficult. And I've had many clients like that. And EMDR therapy, it is exactly the tool that can, undo a lot of that damage, because you can use EMDR to go back and to rewrite those neural pathways, to unwrite them, in a way to allow the individual to really learn the truth that was always true, that they were a wonderful, beautiful, perfect child that was brought into this world and that didn't deserve what had happened to them, but that they were subjected to individuals that were really sick, or that really acted in inappropriate ways, and that it wasn't their fault, and that they can actually have new beliefs. They can actually heal from that. And what they thought was always going to be their self-identity and their reality and their automatic reactions can actually be changed. Of course, I recommend EMDR therapy for healing, but in addition to that, and I always recommend this to my clients too, is there's a few things that you can do. One, you could take advantage of hypnosis, which is basically just giving your unconscious mind a suggestion to start working things on an unconscious level. You can help to program your mind for healing, for recovery, for faster processing by just giving those kind of tailored suggestions. You can do it yourself. You can Google and learn and read about self-hypnosis. It's really not very complicated. There's lots of resources on YouTube and stuff like that. You can learn to do your own recordings and listen to them, or you can have a professional do it. So I really find that hypnosis is a wonderful adjunct or like accompaniment tool to help a person accelerate their healing, and also not even just accelerate their healing, but oftentimes clients will believe that they'll never get better. Like, I'll never get better. This will never change. I'm doomed. Understandably, because of their history. So I find that hypnosis is one of those things that can powerfully program you to start to feel different about your life, your future, your possibilities. So I would definitely recommend that. Another thing that I would recommend is doing a gratitude journal, a daily morning and evening gratitude journal. And I have a version on my website that I prescribe to clients, or use just affirmations, like first thing in the morning and when you go to bed, affirmations about what you want to believe about yourself. I'm going to heal. I'm safe. I'm strong. I'm beautiful. Whatever it is that you feel you would want to believe, that if you believed would be helpful to you. Use all those tools and to help program you for that. Lastly, I would definitely recommend mindfulness and meditation. So there's a lot of very affordable meditation courses online and in person, MBSR courses that a person can take. And the more you meditate, a small daily practice of even just 5 or 10 minutes, just help to foster a daily sense of mindfulness, which will increase your level of happiness day to day, not while you're meditating, but between meditation sessions, and also help you in processing what's going on in your environment, and help you in not being so emotionally reactive when you do get upset to situations. You can find happiness after a debilitating experience. And it's not easy to recover from trauma. It takes work and persistence, but it absolutely is possible. And while it's unfortunate that nobody can pick you up and do the work for you, it's a reality, which means that you need to do the work yourself. And if you're watching this, then that means that you're strong enough, and you will, and you can, and there is happiness at the end of the tunnel. Secretly, yes. It's kind of a loaded question, because to say always about anything, it really depends on what condition is the individual coming in with, and what are their goals. So if they're coming in with PTSD and their goals are to not have PTSD and to live a normal functional life, then I would say 100% EMDR works. And I believe that it would always work given the correct application, that you're working with a therapist that you're really connected with, that you have a lot of trust with, that has a lot of experience and support, and is able to tailor the technique to meet your needs. In that case, I believe that EMDR would work and should work, and there's a lot of evidence to say that it does work. I guess, if you want to hear the converse of that, the converse is that some people, for example, with chronic illness conditions come into EMDR therapy because they want to heal their conditions, and they want a cure for this condition or that condition. And, I can't say that EMDR therapy will cure that condition. But what I can say is that whatever part of that condition is due to stored trauma in the body and is being expressed in the form of your symptoms, when those are resolved, then it's logical that the condition would improve. Can you be cured by EMDR? I can't answer that. So I always try to post resources on my website to help people. But other than that, I'm a fan of Guy Finley. He has a lot of recordings and videos on YouTube, and sometimes I send my clients there. It's not for everyone. Some people don't like it, some people do, but those that do, I think, really benefit from a very powerful message. And in addition, I always recommend reading John Sarno's work, like healing back pain, to individuals that are experiencing chronic pain, and really understanding some of the emotional linkages to physical pain. I really find that that's helpful as well. Don't give up. There are dips in every recovery. In every recovery, there are dips, meaning you go up 2 or 3 steps and then you come back down 1 or 2, and then you go up 3 or 4 and then you come back 1 or 2. And sometimes when you go down, it feels like you're at the bottom, but that's just an emotional reaction. And when the dust settles, you realize that you're not at the bottom, that you've still made progress. And so it's really important that you continue to pick yourself up and keep going, because before you know it, you'll be above the clouds and you'll be really happy that you got there.